Hey, this is Benny Johnson back for another iOS development tutorial, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you guys how to use table views. Now, table views, when I personally started, I found them really complicated. They had all this code and they had all these methods, and they really seemed more complicated than they actually should have been. But once you get used to and you understand the concept of table views and how they work, table views are actually really easy. So don't stress if you find them complicated at first and confusing, because that's my personal experience I had with them. They become easy over time, and once you really understand how they work and that sort of thing, you can shoot up a table view in no time and without any effort at all. So to begin with this tutorial, we're going to create a single view application. I'm just going to call this table view, which is a really original name, and we're going to create it for the iPhone using storyboards and automatic reference counting. So go ahead and create that. So the first thing you want to do is you actually want to jump over to your storyboard file, and you just want to create this original view controller. Then we just want to get rid of the class files that came with that because we don't need that crap. Now I'm just going to close this off. Now, to use a table view controller, in the case of in the case of iPhones or iPod Touch, you actually need a table view controller, and this is a special view controller built to actually handle a table view. So what we want to do is just want to drag over a table view controller from the right hand panel, and that's all we need to do. Now, what we want to do is actually, this sort of displays sort of table view prototype content, and we've got these prototype cells. What does that mean? Well, basically, there's two different types of table views you can have when using storyboards. You can have static cells, which are just basically cells that table views that you can actually create using just drag and drop methods. Like you can add labels and that sort of thing, change the data and all that sort of jazz. It's just sort of your usual view controller and that sort of thing. And you also have these prototype cells, or dynamic, which they're technically called. And these dynamic type table views are the original table views that you actually initialize through code. And that's what we're going to be learning today. So the first of which we need to do is select that little blank space, which is our cell. Now, with prototype cells, you can have a number of cells that actually appear here, and you can have different types of cells that have different looks and that sort of thing. But for this tutorial, we're just going to use one. Now go over to the attributes inspector, and we want to set the style to basic. There's also custom and right detail, left detail, subtitle. You can play around with these, but basically custom is really cool, but it's complex. So we're going to stick with basic. Then in the identifier, we want to set a identifier basically for this cell. And identifiers are used for cells that are going to be the same. Basically, because we have this problem, right? We have 1,000 songs in your music application. You know that it's displayed in a table view. Instead of Apple saying, well, table views should create all those 1,000 cells. So each cell takes up a little bit of memory, but 1,000 cells take up a hell of a lot of memory. So instead of doing that, we actually say there's 10 cells that actually appear on your iPhone instead of doing 1,000. So we use 10 primary cells, maybe a little bit more, maybe 20 cells. 10 appear on your iPhone, 20 just hang around in memory. And basically what it does is, with this identifier, if the cell that's about to appear, say for example, you're scrolling up or scrolling down, whatever, if the cell that's about to appear the same as sort of the cell that needs to appear, it will just basically reuse the cell. and it will just change the values, say this text label in here, maybe there's an image there, it will change the image, and that's basically what it does. It recycles these cells instead of creating entirely new ones and putting those in memory. So that's why we have this identifier, and we're going to set that to cell. Like anything in storyboards, we actually need to create our view controller or our controller for that view. So we're going to go over and create that by going File, New File, and it's going to be Objective-C class, and we're just going to call this TV shows. And it's going to subclass UI Tableview. Go ahead and create that. And we just need to configure our view controller to actually use that class. So go over to the class inspector and select that TV shows view controller. So in the header file, we do not need to do any work because we do not have any external objects that need to access it or anything like that. So don't worry about the header for the moment. Now go over to the .m, and this is where all the action is going to happen. Now you can already see that there's a hell of a lot of code already there, and this is basically the primary cause for what scares off beginners in terms of table views. But as you learn to use table views, you find the method and code that it already has created for you are really convenient. So don't stress about all this code and it's being confusing and everything. It's really not that confusing, and I'll go through it step by step. But before we do this, we actually need some data to display in our table view. And for this tutorial, I'm just chosen TV shows. So that's what we're going to do. So basically, I'm creating a property, and this is going to be an NSArray. And this is what we're going to use to actually store our data in our TV shows. So I'm just going to call this TV shows. And that's it. Now, in the view.did_load, this is probably the best method to actually add objects to our TV shows array. So to access it, we go self.tvshows equals at, and we'll use a new syntax like that. And all we need to do is add our objects. So I'm going to add some of my favorite TV shows. The first one being Breaking Bad. We've got Burn Notice. Chuck. Pretty good show. Dexter. Game of Thrones. And last, I forgot, House. That's pretty good. And just end that off with a semicolon. Pretty basic, just an NSArray with some objects. Now, I've got our TV show model. Let's go ahead and start creating our table view. So the first of which is our data source methods for our table view, and these are just methods that return data relating to the table view that tell it what data to actually display. So what we're going to do is start off by tackling the first method, which is number of sections in table view. Now you may be asking, what is sections? Well, sections are just basically, say if you refer to your music application, you have the A's and the B's and the C's and the D's and etc. for all your songs and that sort of thing. And these are sections. So each one of those, each letter of the alphabet for your songs is a section. But for this tutorial, we're not going to use sections just to decomplicate the things. So we actually need a section, because if we have 0 sections, well then our table view will be blank. We actually need one section at least to have a table view with actual data. So we're going to return 1, and this will return, say that there's one section in our table view. Next, that was pretty simple, right? Next we want to tackle the next method, which is number of rows in sections. Now, because we only have one section in our table view, we do not need to deal with different types of sections and that sort of thing. But how many rows would we need to have in that section? Well, we can say, for example, let's see. Well, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 6 TV shows, right? We probably need 6 rows. So what we could do, we could go return 6. Although this would work, it's not the most efficient way to do it. So, say for example, I wanted to add another TV show which was awesome, and I wanted to add Doctor Who. Alright, well then, if I'm returning 6, but I've got 7 TV shows, Doctor Who's not going to appear there, and that's going to be problematic. So to solve this issue, instead of us counting the amount of objects we've got in our array, all we need to do is go self.tvshows.count. And that's it. That's all we need to do. And this will just basically count the amount of objects we've got in our self.tvshows and return the amount which is appropriate to the amount of rows we need in our section. Alright, so that's basically it. Next we have our last method that we need to implement, and this is our self-arrow and index path. Now what this method does is it creates a object which is a UI Tableview cell. So a special object which is sort of the cell which your table view is made up of. So it goes ahead and creates a new cell. What it does is it returns our cell. But in between the point where it creates a cell and returns a cell is where we configure the cell, and we set the label text, we may set the image to display in that cell, etc, etc. Now this code here, UI Tableview cell equals Tableview DQ reusable cell with identifier, cell identifier. And this is where our identifier comes in that we set in our Tableview attributes property in identifier. Basically this code says if we've got a cell that's available that we can recycle with the same identifier which we've got up here, cell, which means that it is the same and we can recycle it because they're the same object, then go ahead and use that cell instead of creating a new one. So basically, to actually get our objects to actually display in our array, all we have to do is reference cell, and then we need to reference the text label, and we need to reference the text property of that. Set it equal to self.tvshows dot, and then we need to reference, well, let's begin here. Well, this is where the index path comes in, right? Index path has the section of the table view where the current row is, and also the row number where it wants the cell to appear. And this is where the index path comes in. So I'm going to use the new Objective-C syntax, and we're going to say index path dot row. Basically, so if we want to sell, say for example the table view wants to sell for row 2, it's going to go in here and it's going to call this method. It's going to pass our table view in, and it's going to pass this index path which will have section 1 and it will have the row 2. So basically what this does is it goes ahead and creates a new cell, and then this creates the text equal to self.tvshows, and then the object at indexPath.row, which is 2, and it will return burn notice. And say for example the row was 3, it would return Chuck. If it was 4, it would return Dexter. If it was 5, it would return Game of Thrones, etc, etc. So that's basically how it works. So let's go ahead and test it out. And there you go, we've got our new table view, we've got the individual TV shows appearing there, and that's it. That's basically it. I'll see you guys later. Bye.